In order for relationships to be successful, there needs to be rules, boundaries, and communication. In the case of the American colonies and Britain Crown relationships after the French and Indian War were in conflict, as the boundaries had been crossed, with British forces quartering their soldiers in colonial homes. Rules had been broken when Parliament raised taxes without permission. The opportunity for compromise ended when the British Parliament failed to communicate to the colonies governments, and then suspended their operations. Colonial America declared war to fight for their independence.
Crossing boundaries. The French and Indian War and the Proclamation of 1763. The French and Indian War was a long struggle between France and Great Britain for territory and power. Because many Native Americans fought with France in the latest conflict, the colonists called it the French and Indian War. After the French and Indian War, Great Britain saw that defending the western line would be costly. Therefore, the British passed the Proclamation of 1763, which forbid colonists to settle west of the Appalachians. The colonists were furious. They felt the British had crossed a boundary by siding with the Native Americans. The colonists thought they had won the right to settle in Ohio River Valley, and the Great Britain did not have the right to tell them what to do. Great Britain feared the colonists would not accept their proclamation and decided they would need to keep troops in the colonies. In 1765, the British passed the Quartering Act, which placed British soldiers into people's homes. Great Britain felt that it was the colonists' fault that they were in debt. By putting soldiers into people's homes, they wouldn't have to pay to build barracks to house the soldiers, and the soldiers could secretly spy on the colonists in cases of rebellion. By 1770, tensions increased in the American colonies as the colonies suffered from the restrictive economy pressures of increased taxation. Tempers were on the rise, and a group of colonial leaders had started to meet in secret with the intention of trying to find a way to separate from the British. The mounting pressure soon led to a crowd of colonists surrounding a British guard outside Boston Custom House. The guard reacted by hitting one of the colonists, which made the crowd grow bigger. The guard shouted for assistance, and 8 redcoats came to his rescue. After a tense showdown between the guards and colonists, a redcoat shot into the crowd, possibly an accident, and people panicked. The chaos that followed left 5 colonists dead. The patriot Samuel Adams referred to the event as a massacre, and his fellow patriot Paul published an extremely biased etching of the event with the intent to anger the American public and further discussions of American independence.
Breaking rules. The British neglected the rights of the colonists, which made them used to ruling themselves. They were also used to ignoring the parliamentary laws. Following their French and Indian War, the British had to deal with a massive amount of debt after their victory over the French. Believing that the colonists were the reason for the debt, the British Parliament, ordered by King George III, passed legislation so that the colonists could repay the British debt. The same year as the Quartering Act passed, the Stamp Act was also signed. The Stamp Act was a tax on paper, including playing cards, historical records, and postage stamps. The American colonists felt the British broke the rules by charging a tax on goods that had never been taxed before. As British citizens, American colonists felt this was unfair, as no other British citizens pay these taxes.
To add insult to injury, in 1766, in response to the colonists' reactions to the Stamp and Quartering Act, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, which stated that Parliament had the right to pass laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The British government wanted the American colonists to remember that the King and Parliament were superior to their colonial governments.
Great Britain, fearing more violence, withdrew the soldiers from Boston. However, they still wanted the Americans to know that they still had the power to tax the colonies. The Tea Act was passed in 1773. With this act, Parliament granted the British East India Company to tea a monopoly on all tea sales, with them being the only company that sells tea. They could raise the prices and everyone had to buy it. This aggravated the citizens of the 13 colonies, which then started the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party was a raid of 3 British ships in which a group of American patriots named the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Mohawk Indians and proceeded to throw 342 chests of tea into the ocean. Failure to communicate. Great Britain, fearing more violence, withdrew the soldiers from Boston. However, they still wanted the Americans to know that they still had the power to tax the colonies. The Tea Act was passed in 1773. With this act, Parliament granted the British East India Company to tea a monopoly on all tea sales, with them being the only company that sells tea. They could raise the prices and everyone had to buy it. This aggravated the citizens of the 13 colonies, which then started the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party was a raid of 3 British ships in which a group of American patriots named the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Mohawk Indians and proceeded to throw 342 chests of tea into the ocean. The Americans had decided they had had enough. They were done trying to communicate their feelings with Great Britain and the King. The American leaders, who had started meeting several years before, decided to finally call for a committee of delegates to decide what to do next.
In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was completed. It was written as a letter to King George III and the British Parliament as a statement of their grievances and as a notice that the American colonies were done trying to compromise and said they were breaking away from the British Empire with the intention to create their own government. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson stated that all men created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted of men. If a government becomes destructive, citizens are allowed to abolish it.